What's up, everybody? Thank you for tuning in for another edition of the NFL Draft Show. My name is Dan Kornhauser.
And I'm Sam Dietz.
Thank you guys for tuning in as we continue going over the happenings of the 2022 NFL Draft. As everyone knows, it was a couple of weeks ago. I was in Vegas covering the draft for the Grueling Truth. Had a blast, came back with some stories and a whole new perspective on this sort of stuff. And last week we broke down the NFL draft because the week prior I was still in Vegas coming back. So week off from the show, but last week we came back. And this week we're going to continue the evaluation and analysis of the 2022 NFL draft. This time we're going to focus on undrafted free agents. And there were every year there's a lot of solid prospects that fall out of the draft for different reasons. And prior to the draft, you had asked me that question. You asked, what players I could see that at one point were considered potential high prospects, day one, day two picks, completely dropping out of the class. And I had trouble answering it. I know we both said Jalen Weidemeyer. You mentioned him first, and we agreed on that. And he was one of the players who did drop. But there were some very interesting names, particularly for me in my top 100, top 125. That dropped, including guys like Carson Strong, Justin Ross, Kellen Diesch, Alec Lindstrom, just to name a few. So we're not gonna obviously touch on all these guys, but we're gonna go over some of the more interesting names, let you guys know where they ranked on our big boards, and discuss who signed them and why they fell and our thoughts on that. So let's start at the very top, man. Carson Strong, quarterback from Nevada. A lot of people in the media thought that he could very well be one of the top quarterbacks off the board at one point, with people saying he could be a late first round pick back in like February, March, which I was never buying, and I don't think you were ever really on that board either. But there was some buzz around that. Ended up him going undrafted. I had him 80th on my big board. Where did you stand with Carson Strong going into the draft?
Yeah, I had Strong at 91, so I was a little bit lower on him than you. But it was quite clear that he was a guy who produced at a high level in college for 2 years. He started in 2019. 2019, looking at his tape, looking at his stats, really does not make you think of an NFL player. In 2020, that's when he showed the promise, the potential. He played over 70% of his passes, 27 touchdowns, 4 picks. And this past year, over 4,000 yards, also completed over 70% of his passes, 36 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. Now, that offense does have a bit of an air raid style to it, so it's not all, obviously, numbers that would transition to the NFL. That being said, when you look at his arm strength and you look at what he was able to do in college and look at some of the stuff he had to run at the line of scrimmage in terms of the responsibilities he had, if not for this knee, I'm almost positive he gets drafted. Because, frankly, you compare him to some of the guys who were taken later in the draft, like Skylar Thompson. I mean, I don't think there's any team in the world that would rather have Skylar Thompson over Carson Strong if Carson Strong's knee is just average. I mean, even if he has no mobility in terms of being able to create as a runner, if he just has enough mobility to not have to worry about the knee becoming degenerative in the future, and he can still kind of move the pocket a little bit and still have like Tom Brady levels of mobility, I think for sure he's drafted at least where Sam Howell got picked, at least in that range.
Yeah, I was shocked. I had him at number 80 on my big board, and for all the reasons you said, good size, big arm, that prototype look and feel. And he went in. He carried that Nevada team at certain points throughout the season, just airing it out because he had no choice. But the history of knee injuries was a massive red flag, and apparently it was much more of a red flag than anyone in the media considered, considering he fell out of the draft entirely. Still kind of weird. He did sign with Philadelphia, which is an interesting fit. The Eagles GM, Howie Roseman, gave him a $320,000 guaranteed undrafted free agent contract, which pretty much should be a good indicator of what they think about him. He's probably going to compete right away for their number 3 quarterback spot out there in Philly behind Jalen Hurts and Gardner Minshew. He is a completely different player than either of those two guys. He has the arm that neither one of them has, and he has no mobility, where those two guys are both pretty mobile. So it's an interesting fit, maybe a little signal of what direction this team's going to go in if Jalen Hurts doesn't take that step forward as a passer this year, because he's pretty much this is pretty much his last year he's got to they got to the playoffs last year. Now it's time to take that next step as a passer. We already know that you can run. We already know the physical talent that you have. And he is one of the favorites in fantasy football this upcoming season, and for good reason. But he's very much like I feel like he's got 1 foot out the door going into this upcoming season. He's gonna have to play well, and if he doesn't, well, maybe he's out, and whoever the Eagles bring in the 2023 draft or next offseason might be competing with Carson Strong or who knows. But it's an interesting fit. Are there any other quarterbacks that didn't get drafted that you want to discuss real quick and show some love to?
I mean, the one guy who I liked throughout the entire process who wasn't drafted is Keel Glass from Alabama A&M.
Okay.
Understandably, he has really small hands in the same range as Kenny Pickett. So if you're going to knock a guy like that from a small school, I can see why he fell out of the first round. But he was super productive at Alabama A&M. When I looked at his tape, he has the arm strength to connect with guys who are 50-plus yards downfield. And it's not just like the ability to bomb it. He can drop it in the bucket from that far away. And he also has the arm strength to do what some quarterbacks can't do in this draft class, which is just put the ball on a line, on a rope, in between two defenders, 10 to 15 to 20 yards downfield. So I was somewhat surprised that no one took a shot on him late in the draft, especially when someone like a Skylar Thompson goes. Akil Glass was a guy who I thought should have been drafted based on his college production and based on some of the traits I saw in film. Now, granted, his accuracy is kind of, I would call it similar to Desmond Ridder in the sense that sometimes he kind of just sprays it to some extent all over the field and doesn't necessarily put it in the tight window that he's aiming for. But at the same time, for a 7th-round pick, I mean, it's a quarterback. And a quarterback who I thought had a lot of good tape. So I think Akil Glass is a guy who I was surprised did not get enough love and did not get picked this year.
All right, let's move on to the quarterback position. Before we do that, I want to remind you guys that betting.net is your best bet for sportsbook and casino sites. So head on over to betting.net. Now let's move on to the running back position. There were some intriguing names that were available that didn't get picked. Among them, sorry, I think I got my chart here. Here we go. Among them, Tyler Goodson from Iowa, Devontae Price from Florida International, Master Teague III from Ohio State, who had a really big performance at the Combine and at the Pro Day, ran very well. Abram Smith from Baylor, Greg Bell from San Diego State. Just some names that coming out that I thought would have a possibility of getting drafted. What running backs stood out to you? What guys were a big surprise for you when you look over this list?
Yeah, Abram Smith was a surprise to me. I had him ranked pretty high on my board. I had him 155th overall. So when I watched him at the Senior Bowl, I think he actually showed more at the Senior Bowl than people were anticipating, both in terms of his receiving ability and both in terms of ability to make people miss in the open field, because he had multiple missed tackles in space at the Senior Bowl. He caught the ball pretty well, which is something he didn't or wasn't asked to do quite a bit at Baylor. And he was very productive this past season for the Bears. 1,601 rushing yards, 12 rushing touchdowns. And when you watch him, he's not going to be an every down back, no, but he certainly has the power. And I believe he's got a background as a linebacker, and you can really see that in how he plays and how he kind of runs with power and energy. He was a linebacker for them in 2020 who actually had pretty decent stats at the position. So Abram Smith to me was a surprise because based on his physical traits and based on his production in college, I think this is a guy who fits ideally as a power back in an NFL scheme. Really, I mean, like I said, 7th-round picks are basically just garbage to some extent. You know, you throw them away. There are a lot of guys who are 7th-round picks who will not even make NFL rosters at any point in their careers. So someone like Abram Smith, who I think is specialized to the point where he'll be an effective player in the NFL. It was a little bit of a surprise for me he didn't get picked, but I think he ends up in a good spot in New Orleans. We have Alvin Kamara, who's the versatile back. You've got Mark Ingram, who does a little bit of the power stuff. But he has kind of been declining recently. If he gets hurt at any point during the year, I think Abram Smith will make the roster and get an opportunity to get some touches in place of Mark Ingram at some point.
Yeah, and he actually signing with New Orleans was a really good move on his behalf. I think that's a perfect team for him and his skill set. He'll fit right in with that team. He can play special teams. Like you mentioned, the production was there, good size at 6 foot 215. And it was a little surprising for a guy with his versatility who's played linebacker, who started at running back, and like you said, had over 1,600 yards rushing. Kind of weird. I was looking to see if I can really find out what dropped him, but really it's just a matter of not being an elite athlete, pretty much being more of a rotational guy. I don't know. Like you said, if I'm a team and I'm picking toward the tail end of the 7th round or something like that, if you're gonna take a flyer on a nobody, take on flyer on a guy like this. Only good things can happen. Um, are there any other running backs that stood out to you? Because for me, I'm looking at this list. I really liked the idea of Master Teague the third coming out. He performed very well physically, had a really good 40, has the size you look for, doesn't have the tread on the tires, and he was a highly sought after recruit coming out of high school. It's not like he was, like a 2-star guy who was moving around different positions trying to find his place. He's big back, got the speed, 5'11", 221. I mean, I guess the injury that he dealt with in college cost him, but
I think that was it. That, and he kind of got marginalized in that running back room at Ohio State over time. Like, he never really took the next step, I think.
I mean, yeah, he was working behind J.K. Dobbins a couple of years ago. He was a third-team All-Conference selection in 2019. Then J.K. Dobbins took over. Then he suffered an Achilles injury in 2020 during spring practice. I mean, he was back before the season started, but he got another injury that cost him 6 games in 2021. So, yeah, the injury is probably something that hurt him in the end, but
yeah, and then ends up getting stuck behind Meion Williams and Trayvon Henderson, who are both going to be probably pretty highly taken running backs in their own draft classes eventually. So I just think he ended up in a crowded running back room that never really thinned out. He never really got that chance to do what the Alabama backs seem to do, which is always there's a guy who eventually just waits behind someone and gets his turn, and he never really had that chance.
He signed with the Chicago Bears, so he might get some burn in the preseason if he makes it through camp or whatnot. He might be in contention to be that RB3 for this team if he can play special teams as well, even if he's a gunner or something like that. I had him at 198 on my big board. So, again, wasn't that high, but still worth drafting. Another running back worth drafting, but I guess grow on trees, so you can't really lose that bet. I do want to remind you guys again before we move on to the wide receiver position that your top sportsbook comparison site is betting.net. Oh, there's too many T's in betting down there, but it's betting with 2 T's, guys. Betting.net. It offers extensive reviews on the best sportsbooks out there, so head on over to betting.net. Let's move on to the wide receiver position, and there's a few guys on this list that I'll definitely want to talk about. I think we should just start at the very top with one of the obvious names, Justin Ross, one of your boys, a wide receiver from Clemson. I had him 89th overall on my big board. He signs with the Kansas City Chiefs. I think that was a fantastic signing, both for him and for Kansas City. Talk to us about Justin Ross. We know about the medical injury questions and the neck injury and this cervical spine surgery. Is that it pretty much? Is that just another medical red flag like Carson Strong?
I think that was it. And he had an issue with his foot this past year that cost him towards the end of the season. I'm saying Justin Ross was kind of set up to fail this year. He was only cleared for physical contact in August. So he didn't have a full run-up of being able to play and get prepared for tackle football in the same sense that he would in a regular offseason. He never had that opportunity going into this year. On top of that, he played with one of the most miserable starting quarterbacks I think we've seen this past year. DJ Uyunglele struggled to hit the broadside of a barn for most of this year. And Clemson's offensive coordinator didn't help at all because they called just very crappy plays that were all so short. Everything was within 10 yards on a scrimmage. Justin Ross really got going as a freshman when he was able to stretch the field. He averaged 21.7 yards per catch as a freshman, and he was not allowed to do any of that this past year. And he's not a burner per se. He doesn't have great separation skills, but frankly, he's 6'4", and he's a long 6'4". So he's able to win a lot of contested catch situations, and he does stack guys over time if you just let him run deep, which Clemson did not do this past year. And they took him, as a freshman, he played 83.3% of his snaps out wide. In his sophomore year, 79.3 were out wide. This past year, 45.1 were out wide. He played the majority of his time in the slot, a role he had not played at an extensive amount up until this point in college. And again, everything was short. So really, they took everything that Justin Ross did well and let him do none of it. So I don't think this is Justin Ross's fault at all. Obviously, a congenital issue that he needed to have surgery for. Again, that's not his fault. And then crappy play calling and just a bad offensive setup this past year really hurt his stock. That combined with the injury is why he fell out of the first round or fell out of the draft entirely.
Now, I had him at 89th. Where did you have him on your board?
95th.
95th. So we're pretty close on that front. And like I mentioned, he signed with the Kansas City Chiefs. And since they traded Tyreek Hill, yes, I know that they added Sky Moore and a couple other guys and free agency and whatnot. But let's be honest, there's targets available out there.
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, the floodgates are open. Touches are available. Anyone can win them at this point. It's anyone's game to go in there and just ball out.
Now, I know they signed Marquez Valdez-Scantling and Juju Smith-Schuster. They brought in Sky Moore. But none of those, besides Valdez-Scantling, none of these guys, those other two guys don't have the size of a Ross. They don't have that winning 50-50 balls ability that he has. And as he already proved in 2019, I think it was when he, or 2019, yeah.
2018 was his freshman year.
2018. Okay, yeah. So that's when he showed everyone what he could do. Like you said, averaging over 20 yards a catch and whatnot, showing to be a big play threat. So if he can get to, and this past year, I know the other thing that he was dealing with was he seemed to be sapped of his explosiveness. He tested poorly as well. He had a awful 10-yard split at Clemson's pro day. So the health, along with the bad testing at Clemson's pro day, sunk him. But he is, of all these free agents, these undrafted free agents, he's one of my favorite guys in terms of not only the player, but where he ended up signing. Another name that popped up for me at the wide receiver position, Kevin Austin Jr., the wide receiver from Notre Dame. I had him at 149 on my board. He signs with Jacksonville. And, he got a lot of love leading up to the draft. And 6'2", 200 pounds, good size, good length, good speed, tested nicely, but the production was questionable. He only had one season of notable production with Notre Dame. And we've seen guys like this, I guess, speedy wideouts, but didn't really show it much on the field. I thought he had the potential to get drafted at least in the 4th, 5th round. Teams are always looking for players like this, and there was a lot of good hype around him leading up to the draft. So, were you shocked by his fall, and where did you have him on your board, if at all?
So I had him lower than you. I had him 211, but that's still very much within draftable range. That's still clear by a good margin, by a full round almost. So I was surprised that he fell this far, and I think it's partially because a lot of his wins this past year came deep. There might be some worries that he's really a downfield threat, and it's kind of it. And you mentioned the fact that his speed didn't necessarily translate to the field. You don't really watch him and think this guy's a speed demon per se. When you saw his 40 time, he's not the same as a DK Metcalf where the speed shows up on tape, and you can see that in an actual game situation. That being surprised because he tested so well, and we know the NFL does tend to value the testing numbers. I was surprised he didn't get drafted. There were a few receivers like him and Charleston Rambo from Miami were probably two guys who I was really surprised didn't get drafted based on their production this past year, combined with some of the tests they had.
Mckay Polk is another one. I'm glad you mentioned. I'm glad you mentioned Rambo because I didn't have him that high on my board, but he did well enough at Miami's pro day. 6'1", 32-inch arms, good production. He produced at Oklahoma. He produced at Miami. Despite having De'Ara King as his quarterback for a few games to start the season, he went in. He put in that work. So the production is there. The size is there. The testing was good enough. But it's just one of those things. I think as the more we go over these guys and we go down the list, I think some of this is just NFL teams getting cute. Like maybe they don't see as high of a ceiling for a guy like Rambo. Maybe he's never going to be a wide receiver 1 or 2. But in the NFL, they're going spread a lot more. We're seeing a lot more 3, 4, 5 wide receiver packages. We're seeing teams get creative with guys, and Rambo could maybe even play special teams as well. That's that's not unheard of, and that wouldn't be silly at all to consider something like that for a guy of his talent. But I think NFL teams are just getting too cute. Mckay Polk is another one. The wide receiver from Mississippi State got signed by the Baltimore Ravens. And another one, big target, 6'3", 185. His biggest questions that led him to get undrafted were the lack of a resume as well as speed questions. And it didn't help that this wide receiver class was so stacked. I mean, we saw a lot of other talented receivers go undrafted. So none of that helped, but Polk is another one. I had him at 171 on my big board. He's another guy who had some positive vibes coming into the draft, and he was another potential day 3 target at a loaded position, but it didn't work out. We're going to keep going down this list, and all these guys that dropped, it's always injuries, long-term injury concerns. Even if the guy didn't get hampered by that particular injury this past season, it's still something teams ding during their checkups. You'll hear about guys having slow testing times or poor measurables or something like that. But let's move on from the wide receiver position. I'm sure we could still mention another 3 or 4 wide receivers that should have been drafted that didn't. But I want to remind you guys that The Grueling Truth is powered by Betting.net. Betting.net is your best bet for finding the online casino or sports book that's right for you. So head on over to Betting.net. Now, I would say let's move on to tight end, but do we really care? Is there anyone besides Weidermeyer worth talking about?
I'll just throw 3 names out there and we can move on. I thought Dietrich Dees was a decent tight end. I thought Garrett Prince from UAB. Weidermeyer, we already mentioned. We talked about him extensively. And then the quarterback turned tight end, Armani Rogers from Ohio, who was at the Shrine Bowl and had not played tight end prior to the Shrine Bowl. I thought those were interesting guys. But really, in terms of in-depth looks, I mean, I don't know if any of them are going to make the NFL roster this year. I think maybe Weidermeyer has a shot because he's in Buffalo. But really, all these guys are probably fringe candidates to make rosters.
Agreed. A couple of guys, Chase Allen the 2 Allens, no related, but Chase Allen from Iowa State, who signed with the Bears, and Austin Allen from Nebraska, who signed with the Giants. I had draftable grades on both those guys. Besides Weidermeyer, I had him at 177 on my big board. So, maybe it was a little too high. But I had Austin Allen right outside my top 200, the Nebraska Allen. So, again, just let's keep going down the list. Let's move on. Let's go to the offensive line. All right, there was a lot of good talent from the offensive line that dropped out. Some really surprising ones. Alec Lindstrom, the center from Boston College, who signed with the Cowboys. Donovan West, Arizona State, signed with the 49ers. That was a huge get for them. Nick Ford from Utah, who signed with the Jacksonville Jaguars. They do need a center, so he might get a chance to make this roster. And that's just on the interior. At offensive tackle, Kellen Diesch.
I go with Diesch, but I could be wrong. I go with Diesch usually.
We're going to go with Diesch just to say it. The Arizona State offensive tackle who signed with the Miami Dolphins. He was actually one of the higher third-rated guy on my board, my undrafted big board, behind Carson Strong and Justin Ross. I had him at 94th overall on my big board. And when you give a guy that sort of a grade, is it a first-round grade? No. So it's not outrageous or outlandish. But I thought Diesch was one of those guys that had a really good shot at not only getting drafted, but being a quality offensive tackle piece, at the very least, a swing tackle type guy. What do you think he dropped for? What stood out about him that made him fall?
If you want me to be honest, I really have no idea. Because looking at him, this is a guy who originally started his career at Texas A&M. Transfers to Arizona State in 2020, where he plays about 300 snaps or so. And then 2021 comes around, and he's excellent. I mean, he only allowed 8 pressures the entire season. That's on 400-plus pass blocking snaps. Mm-hmm. There are some compelling concerns maybe, but he's a little bit of an older prospect. But he's one of the most freakish athletes in this entire draft class. He's an excellent mover. He's going to be a scheme fit for a bunch of teams. And frankly, if he ended up in like a San Francisco or something like that, I mean, there's a lot of places that he really would work out quite well. So I'm surprised that none of those teams, and we know the tackle pool in the NFL is not tremendous right now. It's gotten better the past couple of years, but it has not been tremendous. So I'm surprised that teams that are looking for this very scheme specific player saw this guy post the athletic testing numbers he did, have the tape he had from this past season, and then passed him over. I am surprised. That doesn't make a ton of sense to me.
And I mean, even if you don't look at him as a tackle, because okay, his arms aren't ideal in terms of length. Even if you want to put him at guard, that's fine. Okay, just have him add some pounds and work on his anchor. And why not? He's not a perfect prospect by any means, but you can do a lot worse. And as you said, with someone of his who has his movement skills, who has that athletic ability, one of the most athletic offensive tackles, offensive linemen in the draft. You know, like you said, it's awkward. I'd be curious to see what comes out. And he tested well otherwise at 6'7", over 300 pounds, 4.89, 40-yard dash, a little bit of everything. So Dolphins got a good one. I think Miami, of all these teams, Miami's had a fantastic undrafted free agent signing period, because aside from Deesh, just to show him some love, we'll touch more on it later, but they signed Verone Mckinley, who I'm a huge fan of. I didn't have him. I moved him down my board a little bit at the end of the day when I was putting my final board together, and then moving him down a bit, but I still think very highly of him. They also signed Zaquandre White, running back from South Carolina. Actually, you know what? That's all that's really worth mentioning. Ben still from the Nebraska. Blaze Andrews, offensive lineman from Minnesota. But those top two, Deesh and McKinley, were really good gets. And I do want
that's not bad. If you can find two players as undrafted free agents who end up making your final roster as rookies, I mean that's actually a really good class, because you frankly don't expect any undrafted free agents to make your roster. So if you can end up with two guys on it, that'd be probably one of the better undrafted free agency periods you could get.
Well, we'll circle back to that in a minute, because there's actually a few teams that I liked.
I know
a few of their guys that they signed.
I've seen. There's some teams that signed like 17 UDFAs, and they were like, and like 5 of them I had draftable grades on or whatever. There are some UDFA classes that I just love out there right now.
We're going to touch on that later. We'll finish up this episode with that. But sticking with the offensive line, Obinna Eze, offensive tackle from TCU, who signed with the Detroit Lions, a really good signing for them. Dare Rosenthal from Kentucky, who signed with the Atlanta Falcons. These are two guys, both played well. Eze has elite strength, elite length, 36-inch arms, 6'6", wingspan of 86 inches, condor. Sure, his quickness was a question coming out, but the Lions gave him a big signing bonus, $20K signing bonus, $150K base salary, fully guaranteed, 3-year starter for Memphis and TCU. And at worst for the Lions, I think he has a really good shot at making the final roster, primarily as a swing tackle or backup interior guy, because the Lions' current swing tackles are nothing special. And I know we've had them for a couple of years, but they're really nothing special, really not at all. This guy could play both left and right tackle in a pinch. You could slide him inside at guard, despite his 6'6" frame and his long ass arms. I think his strength and his power could move him inside and be good. And same thing with Dare Rosenthal. Dare Rosenthal's another guy. I don't get it. I mean, he's another one who at one point people were talking about as a potential 3rd, 4th round pick, something like that. He finishes 155th on my big board, signs with Atlanta, as I mentioned. 6'7", over 300 pounds, started every game at left tackle for Kentucky. I know at LSU there were issues of drugs and drug policies, issues and suspensions, because he tested positive for marijuana at LSU, which prompted him to transfer to Kentucky. But Besides that, what an injury that held him out of Kentucky's bowl game. Ah, maybe he's immature because he likes to smoke weed.
Yeah, I think some of it was he came in. He actually weighed a lot less at the combine than what he did. Like in his terms of his final measurements, I think he was below 300 at the combine, and just the very weird weight. He moved very well. Don't get me wrong; he's got really good movement skills, but part of it's a little bit. He's very raw in his technique, and he, like I said, his combine weight is not something you would want him to actually play at, if I remember correctly. But I had him at 229 because he does have a lot of those elite athletic traits. And sometimes you just want to get a traitsy tackle in the room and let your guy work with him. Because that's a lot of teams. I mean, a lot of the NFL is full of narcissists. They all believe they can take the project guy and get him to work. So I was surprised that someone like Rosenthal didn't go in the draft because he has all those traits. And you could see a team that has a good offensive line coach believing you can take him and turn him at least into a swing tackle.
My sentiments exactly. Let's shift it to the interior offensive line. Donovan West, Alec Lindstrom, Nick Ford. I mentioned all those guys. Are there any other names that you want to throw out, and anyone who stood out to you besides those guys?
I was kind of surprised Jason Poe from Mercer didn't get drafted after everyone spent like the 3 weeks leading up to the draft talking about Jason Poe. I was a little surprised he wasn't actually drafted. Now I only have a 248 on my board, so it's not like I expect him to be anything special. But I was kind of surprised he didn't get drafted after everyone spent like 3 weeks in a row just talking about nothing but Jason Poe.
Seemed like a Patriots pick or something like that, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, frankly, he ended up signing with the 49ers, and I shot the 49ers to be a team that might take him because this is a guy who could play fullback or guard or tackle or something. Like, he can move around and play a lot of different roles. He's very small. I don't know if he'll make a roster because, frankly, I think he's like 6 foot flat. He's really undersized. But there's tape of him playing fullback. There's tape of him playing guard. He's one of the best movers. Like, probably would have tested as the fastest interior offensive lineman at the combine this past year. So it is intriguing. And for San Francisco's system, it's probably a guy who will wreak havoc, I imagine, in the preseason and possibly make it on the practice squad or maybe the back end of the active roster.
Now, the 49ers signed a couple of solid interior offensive linemen, him being one of them, Jason Poe being one, Donovan West was the other. And West is another one, just what? Smallish, 6'3", 296, meh. Slow 40-yard dash, meh. I mean, yeah, he's undersized, but 3-year starter who can play guard or center. Good on pulls and traps, good movement for a smaller, he's a smaller guy. I guess that's all it is for me. Can get overwhelmed, not the best feet. All that stuff, I guess, adds up, but we've said this earlier, and I keep thinking about it. I keep going back to it. With so many bad offensive lines and so many bad offensive linemen and so much just trash offensive line play in the NFL, why not invest more in guys that can at least have some sort of a role? Even if Donovan West is a career backup, I mean, you can do a lot worse. Same thing with Alec Lindstrom. Alec Lindstrom for the Cowboys at center could very well compete for a starting job if he's given enough of a shot. It's not like Tyler Battis or whatever his name at center blew it up this past season. He was average. He was better than what he was the year before, but that ain't saying much. It's not like he set the world on fire. It's not like he's unreplaceable. And the Dallas offensive line is going through a little bit of a rebuild as well. So he might find himself, and his brother was a first-round pick for the Falcons. Falcons? Yeah, Chris Lindstrom.
Yep, along their offensive line.
So yeah, he's got good pedigree. It's not like he's coming out of nowhere. So another one. Where are we?
Defensive side of the ball now.
Yes, we're going to go to the defensive side of the ball. But before we go there, I want to find the best place to bet for you. Betting.net offers expert and user reviews for every online sportsbook and casino in your site. So head on over to betting.net. All right, so let's move to the defensive side of the ball, the front seven. How are we gonna break this down? You know what? Let's do interior defensive linemen and end edge rushers with this next group. The interior defensive line I wasn't too high on when it came to the later round prospects and later round guys. Haskell Garrett, one of the bigger names from Ohio State, who at one point could have been a first round pick, drops out, signs with the Tennessee Titans, which I think was a great move for both player and team. Tennessee also signed Jaden Peavy, the defensive lineman from Texas A&M, another good get. Realistically, in a situation like that, when you have a team, let's say like the Titans, who could use some interior defensive line depth, they signed Garrett, they signed Peavy, both of our undrafted guys. Realistically, could you see one, both, neither? What are the odds that these guys make the roster? Particularly, I mentioned them specifically because even a guy like Haskell Garrett had that pedigree going into the season and coming into the draft. Yeah, he fell a little bit, but he was still expected to be at worst a day 3 pick.
Yeah, I think one of them can make the roster. Because you looked at what Tennessee's working with right now, they probably have 3 guys along the interior defense line they feel comfortable with keeping already on the roster. And you're going to slot one of these UDFAs in probably as your 4th guy if he plays well. And you'll probably keep 4 interior defense linemen with someone on the practice squad. So these 2 guys, even if neither of them make the roster, they're both going to end up on the practice squad for sure. I feel pretty confident in that based on what they did this past year because I had draftable grades on both of them. But I wouldn't be surprised, like I said, with 2 guys, 2 UDFAs at the same position making it, that would be pretty rare.
Fair enough. If you had to pick one, which one do you think? Just for shits and giggles.
For what they're looking for?
Yeah.
I would probably lean Haskell Garrett. I think he'd probably be more likely to make the roster for what Tennessee's trying to do along their interior defensive line.
Let me see here. Do I have any of the defensive lines? I mean, I had Haskell Garrett at 201 on my board for what it's worth. Chris Hinton was at 203, so not too far behind him. Jaden Peavy was probably 10 slots later. So I had those 3 guys pretty much all around the same range. Are there any defensive linemen that were undrafted that really stood out to you besides those guys I mentioned?
The only 2 you haven't mentioned that I really looked at were Noah Ellis from Idaho and Marquis Bell from Kentucky. Mm-hmm. They're both big nose tackles. And I mean, nose tackle is not a premier position for the NFL. So I'm not surprised neither of them got drafted, but I did believe that because the 7th round picks are so low value, even 6th round picks, I thought they would go there because they are such prototypical nose tackles. And that's a role that you can't find a lot of guys who fill that role in every draft class. You only find guys like maybe 6 every year who can actually play nose tackle who come into the NFL. So I was a little bit surprised that neither of them got picked.
All right, let's move on to edge rusher. To be honest, no one really was undrafted that really stood out to me. There was no must-haves. I don't know how you feel, but if anything, maybe Myron Tagovailoa Amosa from Notre Dame, if you want to put him as an edge rusher as opposed to a defensive lineman. Christopher Allen from Alabama. But that's pretty much it for me.
Yeah, I had 2 guys, and it was Christopher Allen from Alabama, who I understand because he missed almost the entirety this past year. He got hurt it was either like the second play of the first game or the second game. I forget what it was. He got hurt almost immediately. I think it was against Miami and didn't play for the rest of the year. So I understand why he dropped out of the draft, but if he had played this year, he would have been drafted. I feel pretty confident in that. And the other one is David Anina from Houston. I think I mispronounced that last name. I know I did, but 2 weeks ago I would remember 2 weeks ago I would have known how to say it. At this point, I'm already forgetting, so I had to move on from that. But I was surprised he fell out. He's a bit of an undersized pass rusher, but he had 47 pressures this past year. So he's been productive, and he's been productive for 3 years, frankly, in Houston. So I was a little surprised that he fell out. Actually, had him ranked a little bit higher than Christopher Allen. But frankly, those 2 guys, maybe Tyree Johnson from Texas A&M, that's about it. I mean, most of my edge guys went in this draft.
Yeah, Allen, aside from those top offensive guys, Strong, Ross, Deesh, Lindstrom, Kevin Austin Jr., etc. Aside from those guys, looking at the defensive side of the ball, or either side of the ball, Christopher Allen is a guy I really that I really don't think should have dropped out of the draft. He could be, at the very least, a situational rusher. He could be developed in the right system into a potential starter down the line. And I think he went to a great team that's going to take advantage of his talents. He signed with the Denver Broncos. They do have a need for extra edge rushing ever since they lost Von Miller and even before that. So I know they signed what's his face from Dallas, Steve Risley's boy, Randy Gregory.
Yeah.
I know they signed Randy Gregory, and I know they're pretty much set on the edge with their starters right now, but Gregory has missed time due to injury. I think there's some potential there. I really do. The injuries are what made him drop, and he isn't the most natural bend kind of rusher. He doesn't have that natural bend off the edge, but he's good otherwise. Physical, good physical traits that you look for. And like you said, teams are always looking for guys with that good physical talent. The hubris is real, and they can everyone, all these NFL coaching staffs think they can take a guy who maybe was injury prone in college or needs some refinement in technique, needs better footwork, stuff like that. If he's healthy, Allen can be a contributor as a rookie.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, he's one of my favorite UDFAs in this class.
Let's go on to the linebacker position because we're done with the D-line. We're done with the edge rusher. Let's go to linebacker. I know some people might have had Christopher Allen listed as a linebacker, so if you did, there you go. But some other names did stand out, and this was a position that I had a lot of guys with late round grades that I really thought had a chance to get drafted, and they really should have. I'm talking about guys like JoJo Domann, Aaron Hansford from Texas A&M, Mike Rose from Iowa State, Zaquandre McClain from Auburn. All those guys should have been drafted. All of them weren't for different reasons. I want to start with one of the obvious ones. I want to start with JoJo Domann. JoJo.
Yeah.
I want to start with Casey. I want to start with Casey and JoJo. He signed with the Indianapolis Colts. He 6'1", 225, 230 pounds. He's 25 years old in August. The size, the age, the lack of a defined position, not showing out at the Senior Bowl, those all contributed to him falling. Average athletic testing numbers. Is he a linebacker? Is he an edge rusher? Is he an inside linebacker? Is he a weak side 4-3 guy? Is he a safety? Is he a slot corner? Well, he did a little bit of everything. A jack of all trades, if you will. But with that, it doesn't necessarily mean he's master of any of those positions. He blitzed. He played in the slot a lot. He played the run well. I think his value will come as a backup off-ball guy, maybe one of those hybrid safeties that teams are going with these days, play special teams. I think he'll find a spot in Indianapolis. He's the kind of player that they like to sign and build up and find a role for.
Yeah, I was surprised he fell that far. I think you hit on all the points why. He's been an older player, not an elite athlete. I think his testing numbers really hurt him on this level because he doesn't necessarily have the profile of someone you would want to be covering the slot at the NFL level, even though he did that extensively in college. And you hit on most of the big names here. I think Jack Sanborn from Wisconsin was one of the only other guys who I thought could have been drafted. Maybe Nephi Sewell from Utah. I know that's a guy who is pretty much pinholed for a niche role in the NFL because he's an undersized linebacker, but he does move around really well in coverage. I mean, on linebacker, I think there were a lot of good UDFAs. Forrest Ryan from Villanova is another guy I like quite a bit. That being said, these guys were all – none of them are guys who would play on 3 downs, I don't think. Like none of them are guys who I would put out there every single down and expect to perform at a high level.
Oh, yeah, I agree. And that's why these guys, for the most part, went undrafted. They're not stars. They're not every down guys. I mean, I really like Mike Rose coming out of Iowa State, 6'4", 245. But he didn't really I don't think he tested at all in the lead up. I know he didn't run a 40, or not one that I could find. If I'm wrong, correct me. But I don't remember seeing him running a 40 anywhere or anything like that. So even a guy like Mike Rose, who I really like coming out of college, even him, as good as as much as I liked him, and I think he had a draftable grade. I had Rose at what did I have you, Mike? I had him at 152 on my big board. Maybe this is a little high. Maybe I liked his tape too much, but he's a strong side linebacker. I think he would be fine as a 4-3 outside linebacker or a 3-4 inside linebacker. His biggest issues for me on tape were mobility up the field, pursuit on the weak side, when the ball's going the opposite direction of where he was lined up. But he's in the box, attacking kind of linebacker, someone gritty. I think he'll find a role on special teams in the NFL. And he signed with Kansas City. He's one of the guys Kansas City signed who I liked. Let's move on though. I think we're pretty much done with the linebacker position.
And the 40 time, I do have a 40 time for Mike Rose. I think it was a 4.69. It looks like the same time Darian Beavers ran.
It's gross, but Beavers is a better player.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's one of those things where they run the same 40 or whatever, but what you see on tape shows out. I really like Darian Beavers coming out. To put a bow on the linebackers, I had Zaquandre White at 165 on my big board. JoJo, I had him at 168 on my big board. So those are my three linebacker guys. Well, four if you consider Allen, but aside from Allen, who I had listed as an edge, Rose, McLean, and JoJo, my top three linebackers. McLean signed with the Baltimore Ravens. So look at that. Ravens had a great draft, as they do every year, pretty much, and they signed some good undrafted free agents. But let's move on to the secondary. Put a bow on this. Before we do, I want to let you guys know that betting.net finds the best promotions, offers, and bonus codes, so you don't have to. Head on over to their website, betting.net now, to take advantage of things like free bets and matching deposits. Betting.net. So we're at the 47-minute mark here. We're going to move on to the defensive backs, corners, safeties, and then we're going to give our favorite undrafted free agent class. Just one each. Teams that signed, these undrafted guys and who we like the most. But let's go to the secondary, because I had a lot of defensive backs in my top 200 not get picked. I had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys in my top 200 that were not selected. The highest two were Mario Goodrich and Leon O'Neal Jr. You know how much I loved Goodrich coming into the draft. I had him at 118. When I saw him on tape, I saw a potential starting outside corner who could also play inside if need be. Wouldn't be a superstar by any stretch of the imagination, but good length, good size, good instincts. I liked him a lot on tape. And I know I was higher on him, I'm sure, than a lot of other people. But Mario Goodrich was one of the ones that really stung, along with Jermaine Waller, who signed with the Detroit Lions, corner from Virginia Tech. Josh Joby is another one from Alabama, who signed with the Philadelphia Eagles. There's a lot of good secondary talent that went undrafted. Jaquan McMillan from Eastern Carolina is another one. These teams should be pleased signing some of these guys, and we're seeing more and more undrafted free agents, particularly in the secondary, make moves for their teams and play well. I mean, as a Lions fan, just watching the Lions last season, yes, the Lions were decimated by injuries in the secondary, but they had a few undrafted free agents step up and play really well and earn their spots on the team. And that I think that will continue. I think we're going to see that again this upcoming season with this class of undrafted defensive backs. Verone Mckinley is another one who I was really high on. Verone Mckinley throughout the process. Didn't show him as much love on my final big board. Had him at 151 overall. He signed with the Miami Dolphins, but he didn't test well. He's got height weight issues that he didn't match up. But I mean, 11 interceptions in 3 seasons at Oregon. I don't think you can really shake your nose at something like that. Those instincts He is a smart player. Dolphins have some good depth at safety, but I see no reason why, as long as McKinley is healthy, why he doesn't show out in the preseason, show out in camp, and make this final roster.
Yeah, for me, I think I had 7 defensive backs in my top 200 that didn't get drafted. And the big gut punch with Mario Goodrich, I did not see that one coming. That one, to me, feels like a situation where he falls to maybe the late 5th round, and his agent starts calling teams saying, don't pick my guy. Let my guy be a UDFA so he can sign a contract and pick where he wants to go. Because we know that happens with some guys who they fall far enough and they just tell teams, don't pick us. We're not going to play for you. We want the decision to choose where to go. And Goodrich is a player who I loved at Clemson. He was more consistent this past year than Andrew Booth. Andrew Booth obviously has the ceiling that Goodrich doesn't, but Goodrich was a more consistent player. And he came up big for Clemson, especially in the bowl game. This is a guy who has posted clutch tape in the past. So I was surprised. I had him as the top 100 grade, and he didn't get picked, which is really the shocker for me. But I do love they went to Philadelphia because, frankly, Philadelphia has Darius Slay as an outside corner. They got Avonte Maddox in the slot, and then it's Zach McPherson, Kerry Vincent Jr., Tay Gowan, Mario Goodrich, Josh Jobe, all competing for that second outside cornerback spot. So I think that's actually a really good chance for Goodrich to go and see action as a rookie.
I love Goodrich, man. I'm so happy we're on the same page on that one. I was going to have to bring out Derek if you were going to start bad-mouthing my boy.
No, I would never do that.
What other defensive backs stood out to you? Because I threw out a bunch of names.
Yeah, Mikhail Wright from Oregon. I didn't love him. I had him at 167. I thought he got exposed to the points this past year. He's undersized. He was not an elite athlete. So I think there were a lot of limitations against him. And there was some push right before the draft that he might go undrafted. And he ended up falling all the way off the board. So that surprised me a little bit. He went to Seattle, and Seattle, frankly, needs as much talent as they can get. So I think he has a decent shot to have some success there. Vincent Gray from Michigan was another corner I liked a bit. He went to the Saints. Sean Jolly's a slot corner, went to Cleveland. They got rid of Troy Hill recently, so maybe they need a slot cornerback. And then at safety, you hit on most of my guys, but obviously the one that I had left that you didn't touch on was Marquis Bell, originally from Maryland, who transferred to Florida A&M. A big linebacker / safety hybrid guy, really good sideline to sideline speed and closing speed as well. He signed with Dallas. So that'll be an interesting one. So I know Dallas had Keanu O'Neal this past year, who kind of fills a similar role as that safety / linebacker hybrid. I wonder if Bell will play a similar position this year, if he makes a team.
What about Smoke Monday, safety from Auburn? I know you were a fan of Smoke.
Yeah, no, that was also an intriguing one. I had Smoke. It was my top UDFA safety at 170 on my big board. And he went to the Saints. So I think I like Smoke a lot because he, at the very least, is a very high-end special teams player. And he offers you some ability to play in the box. He can move around quite a bit. He's got the size and versatility to play a variety of roles. So I just like Smoke Monday as a guy who I thought would be drafted because he has the ability to make an impact no matter where you play him. I was a little bit surprised he went undrafted, frankly. Well, to be frank, I was surprised. He was the top 200 player. All my top 200 guys who didn't go drafted, I was surprised for the most part. Now, Smoke and Marquis Bell were the two safeties who I thought for sure would be drafted in this class. And then Verone McKinley and Leon O'Neal right behind them. None of those guys got drafted. I'm still wondering why.
It's one of those things. Now, with Bell and Smoke Monday, it looked like the biggest issues were limitations in different ways. So for Smoke, it looks like coverage issues were the question. Can he cover NFL slot receivers? Is he worth trying to even match up against some of these more athletic tight ends? It's not that he didn't run well. I think he had like a 4.5 40 or something like that when he tested out. But that's something that I read that was an issue. For Marquis Bell, who signed with the Dallas Cowboys, Smoke Monday, I believe, signed with the Saints. But for Marquis Bell, didn't play well his final year in college, only had one pick, looked over aggressive at times on tape.
That's true, but he did have 4 or 5 forced fumbles his final year. So he had like 4 or 5 interceptions his second to last year, and then 4 or 5 forced fumbles the next year. So while he didn't have the picks this past season, he was still a ball. He was still around the ball quite a bit, which is one of the reasons why the ball production was consistent, just came in different areas for him.
I mean, there's a lot to work with Bell. There is. He's got good size, over 6'2", 220 pounds. He ran a 4.4, 140, a 36.5-inch vertical. And like you said, the production in 2019 was there. But FAMU's 2020 season was canceled because of COVID. I know he had brief stays at Maryland and in junior college that did not go well, so character questions. But there's a lot to work with there. I think Dallas made a good signing. And then finally, Josh Joby. I wanted to touch on him real quick because he's a 5'11" corner from Alabama. We know how they coach their defensive backs. He was a blue chip guy coming out of high school. Just didn't have a good career. Didn't play well at Alabama. Was never a consistent starter as he should have been on the outside. Hip flexibility was a question. Another one who you wonder, is he going to be able to cover NFL wideouts? Is he going to be able to stay with some of those shiftier guys? Even with those questions, he's another one who signed with the Philadelphia Eagles, and he should have a good avenue at playing time. Goodrich, Joby.
The Eagles, like I said, the Eagles have a bunch of second-year guys at the second cornerback spot. They really don't have anyone established there. And I think Mike Renner for PFF put it this way: like, Josh Jobe plays like Patrick Surtain, but is less agile. So he's got a little bit of them like methodical pro style play, but he has more physical limitations. So I will be curious to see if he makes the active roster in Philadelphia, because they have a lot of young guys competing for just a handful of spots there in that secondary.
So let's put a bow on it. All right, let's put a bow on the undrafted free agent class conversation. Give me your one team that had the best undrafted free agent signing group, I guess, if you want to say.
Yeah, looking over a bunch of these, because I said there were a lot of teams that had some really loaded groups. If I had to pick one, you brought Miami up, but I really think if I can get them to Philadelphia would be the top one for me. Because you got Mario Goodrich and Carson Strong, both who were top 100 players on my board. You got Josh Jobe, Noah Ellis, Kennedy Brooks from Oklahoma, we didn't talk about, but I think he's going to be a consistent player in the NFL. I think he had three 1,000-yard seasons in college, which is production that you don't see very often. They also got Reed Blankenship, a safety from Middle Tennessee State, later on as a UDFA. Ali Fayed from Western Michigan was pretty productive during his time in college. William Dunkel from San Diego State, playing the interior offensive line, and then Britton Covey from Utah, who was a return man for them, who actually had some spotlight moments in their bowl game this past year against Ohio State. I think that the Philadelphia Eagles had the best UDFA class this year.
Philly was definitely one of my favorites. I liked Miami, and I liked Kansas City as well. Kansas City, besides Ross and Rose, I like the fact that they brought in Dustin Crum. He could be a nice developmental type running back. Jerion Eli from Ole Miss at running back was a nice get. But you know what? I'm gonna actually give some love. I'm gonna pick the Detroit Lions. They have a very interesting class, but I think maybe 3 to 4 of these guys could have the potential to make the final roster, and I could see up to 5 guys total from this group being signed either to the final roster or at the very least on the practice squad. Greg Bell, running back from San Diego State. Corey Sutton, wide receiver, Appalachian State. Josh Johnson, the wide receiver from Tulsa. Obina Eze, as I mentioned before, offensive tackle from TCU. And Kevin Jarvis, the interior offensive lineman from Michigan State. Those are the guys I think have the best chance of making this roster, all for different reasons. Greg Bell can make the team on special teams, as well as contributing as an RB3. Detroit currently has a hole there, and they do like their running backs, and Swift likes getting hurt. So Bell might very well see the field later on in the season. So Bell could make it based on that. Sutton and Johnson could make it mostly because of the need at the receiver position for the Detroit Lions. Josh Johnson, super athletic. Corey Sutton is a really solid prospect. Both of those guys probably should have been drafted, particularly Johnson. But we'll see how they perform in training camp. But one or both of those guys could very well make the final roster. I think, all things considered, with what the Lions added this offseason, I think they're more likely to be practice squad guys, but I'd really like to see one of them, those two receivers, either Sutton or Johnson, make the roster. Ezzy, I mentioned earlier, he should be a swing tackle type guy, or at the very least, a swing tackle and a backup interior lineman. And then Kevin Jarvis can play on the inside. He was a very, very good player at Michigan State. And I actually wrote up a Detroit Lions 2022 NFL draft review where I went over in depth all of their selections, pick by pick, and how they fit on the team as rookies. And I also talked about the undrafted class. So you can check that out. That's on thegruelingtruth.com. You can go over to the NFL section. I'm sure it'll still be up there relatively high in the list of articles and whatnot. Before we wrap things up here, I want to remind you guys that we are powered by betting.net, and betting.net is not just sports betting. Betting.net compares the best online casinos as well. So sit back, relax, and play the top online slots, poker, and table games over at betting.net. So, Sam, we're going to put a bow on it. Any other final thoughts, questions, comments, concerns on the undrafted free agents?
Not much more. You can follow me if you want to like content like this and you want to see some of my own lists and rankings for these kind of things. You can follow me on Twitter at Sam_Teets33. That's TEETS. And of course, I have linked there my newsletter, which I post on 3 or 4 times a week. Today was a mock draft for the 2023 NFL draft, so I'm already looking far ahead. And you can get to that through my Twitter page. It's the pinned post. You just click on that, and you can sign up for free with your email to get updates whenever I upload new articles.
Sounds perfect. And I am also on Twitter. I'm on Instagram as well. It is DB Talking Sports. D as in Dan, B as in Bob. That's DB Talking Sports on Instagram, on Twitter. Give us a follow. Give us a like. Thank you guys for tuning in wherever you are. Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, etc. We're on like 7 different sites at this point live. So thank you guys for sticking with us. We'll catch you guys next week. For Sam Teets, I am Dan Kornhauser. This was the NFL Draft Show on The Grueling Truth.